Yeah. So that's a great question. I think for me, growing up, I started off initially. We lived in a house in a sub or in a cul-de-sac, ranch style backyard. And then I remember there was financial issues, and then we ended up in a townhouse, and then we were homeless. I call it slightly because we lived in this room between my uncle's garage and his house, and then we were in an apartment, and then my father was gone. So over time, I was being conditioned.
Greetings, this is eBlack TV with another video. Today we're talking with Christopher Willars, live. We talk about his struggles within the prison system before, during, and after. Talk about all the advocacy work that he's doing currently right now. And hopefully you guys enjoy. If you haven't already known, this is the season 4. We're talking about authentic, adoptive, adaptive, and aberrant behavior. Please, if you have an opportunity, subscribe, like the video, and let's get into it. What's going on, Chris?
What's going on? How you doing?
Good. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
What's going on? And thanks, again, thanks for having me. My name is Christopher Life Willers. Actually, it's Christopher Luis Willers, but Life is a nickname or name that those close to me have grown to, know me as.
Okay. All right. And let me ask you this. Are you from, I see you're currently in Georgia. Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. Yeah, I'm,
Okay.
I'm, I'm a Chicago guy, born and
So let's
raised.
talk about Chicago a little bit. How long you was out there for?
Man, first 17 years of my life till I ended up enlisting in the military. But
Okay.
yeah, that's all I knew through my teenage years, essentially. Yeah.
What year did you go into the military?
I enlisted at 17. My mother
Hmm.
had to sign a permission, essentially a permission slip or a waiver that
Hmm.
said, I could go into the military because I wasn't 18 yet.
So what year?
That
90.
was 2000.
Oh, okay. So 2000 during, I guess, right after, before the World Trade Center?
Yeah, I was enlisted during 9/11, active duty United States Air Force.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So talk about life before listings. How was Chicago? Were you a bad kid? Were you two-parent housing?
Yeah, so I wasn't a bad kid. I was a kid that was good at straddling the fence.
Okay.
Like so many other kids, I had the hardworking mother. My mother, strongest woman I've ever known. My father was around, but he was in and out. They tried to make it work. It didn't. But I can honestly say they both loved me. They both did what they could do to the best of their ability. But I was just one of those kids. I was explorative. My mother, when it was just me and her, she'd have to work 2 jobs, and I went from sitting in the house to knowing that she's not going to be there to getting out in the streets and just seeing what was going on out there out of boredom or curiosity.
Were you involved in gangs or crews?
Oh yeah. That's just part of the lifestyle, whether you're directly or indirectly, whether I guess actually join one or not. You're living in an area, you grow up with a specific group of people. If you're from a certain area and you go to a certain area, you might as well be the gang that's from that certain area. So yeah, I grew up Chicago, and that area. It's known for that. It's one of the birthplaces of the motherlands for gang culture,
Yeah.
um, and it just is what it is. I remember for me growing up, I was born in '83. I remember when they started now understanding as an adult when they were starting to tear down the projects, and then you had kids that their neighborhood had been beefing with this neighborhood for 20 years, their daddies and now they had to go to the same school, and that would cause conflict. But I just remember certain things about that, man. It kind of, you know, shifted my path, if you will.
Regarding your parents, did your parents were they involved in say advocacy or any type? Because from my understanding, the Black Panther Party or the the Vice Lords, these are all remnants of that era? Were they involved in some of that activity, to your
No,
knowledge?
yeah, no. But as far as my parent, I always had a mother that, we could be living in, you know, maybe not the nicest apartment complex or section 8, whatever it is, whatever section 8, but maybe a red zone or whatever. But when you walked in our apartment, it was clean. It
Yeah.
was nice, smelled good. And the same thing with my father. As I described, he was a proud Mexican man. He taught me how to
Okay.
work hard. Watching him, my mother work hard, um, certain things. So they instilled certain values in me at a young age that maybe a lot of my friends didn't necessarily have.
Okay.
They did teach me things, but again, I think my biggest thing was I was one of those kids that was good at getting away with things, and I was popular, or I was good with connecting with all the social groups, whether it was the gang members, the stoners, the nerds. I could just fit in,
Yeah.
and I just gravitated towards certain things.
Yeah, because you talk about how you got instilled with certain behaviors based on your family. And do you believe that you adopted more of with your surroundings, or you adapted to what was going on around you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think for me, growing up, I started off initially. We lived in a house in a sub or in a cul-de-sac, ranch style backyard, and then I remember there was financial issues, and then we ended up in a townhouse, and then we were homeless. I call it slightly because we lived in this room between my uncle's garage and his house, and then we were in an apartment, and then my father was gone. So over time, I was being conditioned by my environment. I was being conditioned through experience, and I was being conditioned at the time not to see, my mother who worked extremely hard, but was in my eyes was losing traction, not because of her effort, but just because of life. And I was one of those kids. I became angry because I didn't really know how to address my emotions back then. So I would have outbursts, which led to me being kicked out of high school or not finishing. I ended up going to a military ran program, which led me to the military. But I had issues. But yeah, I would think I was conditioned. I was being taught through the environment because my parents, they gave me what I now operate in.
Yes.
But
You're,
prior to 25, prior to my frontal lobe being formed and being, it was about my environment, and
so
not being.
it's interesting that you say that you're operating now in what you were originally or being taught in, or what you originally were taught in, and I would consider that the authentic behavior. That is the when you have high regard for yourself, and then the space that you're in, you're it's less drama filled and less what we call considered ma'afa, which is an African term for death, disease, destruction. So when you're in that space, you're more authentic. A lot of times, what happens is we move to adoption because we're either not having a good sense of self, or you have a good sense of self, but the area is not good, so you're adapting.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you can understand how the different behaviors control the chances we take and the choices we make.
Okay.
So what was the choice for military?
For me, military was just honestly, that was the only route at the time. I ended up having to get my GED, and I knew again I was a pretty smart kid. It's just I got bored with school, so here was an opportunity to travel, and then they threw a bonus at me of 13,000. So that kind of swayed my path more into the United States Air Force, but I didn't go into the career path that I wanted to. So now I'm a 17-year-old kid that's still not equipped emotionally, whatever. Now I'm out in the world. And my thought, even at that young age, was when I went to the military, like I was going to continue to get structure and I could be successful, but it was a complete opposite. Man, the first night out of basic training on a regular base, man, the older guys, the sergeants were trying to give me beer and all types of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely understand how that happens. So, how long did you stay in the Air Force?
I ended up getting a general discharge under honorable conditions, just shy of 2 years.
Oh, okay. So 19, you're back out into
Yeah.
the streets. Where did you return?
I went back to Chicago briefly.
Hmm.
I remember I was going basically living with whatever female I could hang out with at the time or wanted to kick it with me. Hotels, whatever. I was kind of stalling, but eventually I ended up going to Virginia where my mother had moved while I was in the military because that's where family was at the time.